I don't think I did anything wrong. I just laughed when our neighbor joked about our wild night together. He was drunk, it was obviously a joke, and everyone laughed. Everyone except my husband. I didn't know that one careless laugh would lead him to call his lawyer before the week ended. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Elara Vaughn, and I don't think I did anything wrong. It was just a laugh, a quick, nervous laugh at something stupid our drunk neighbor said during the barbecue. He made a joke about our wild night together, everyone laughed, and I laughed too. That's all it was. But Nolan didn't laugh. He just stood there holding his drink like it had turned to stone in his hand. I thought he was being dramatic. I even teased him about it later, said he needed to lighten up, that people knew it was a joke. He didn't argue. He just said, "They'll remember what you laughed at more than what he said." I rolled my eyes because he always talks in riddles when he's upset. The next morning, I noticed how quiet the house felt, like something had shifted in the air. His coffee mug was already rinsed and turned upside down in the sink. His phone buzzed on the counter with a reminder that said, "Downtown 10:40 a.m." I assumed it was work. Now I know it wasn't. I should have realized that silence wasn't forgiveness. It was preparation. But at the time, I still thought I could laugh my way out of anything. The backyard smelled of charcoal and summer air, mingled with the faint sweetness of lemonade and the tang of spilled beer. I moved among our neighbors with practiced ease, laughing at stories I'd heard a dozen times, smiling at faces that barely registered me beyond the sound of my laughter. Grant, our neighbor, had already had too much to drink, his words slurring, his gestures exaggerated. I knew it was harmless. He always did this when he'd had a few too many. But then he said it, loud enough for half the yard to hear, something about a wild night between him and me. I laughed, probably too loudly, probably too eagerly. It felt automatic, that nervous, high-pitched laugh that comes when everyone's eyes are on you. I waved my hand, as if to dismiss the comment, to make it seem like it didn't matter, but the damage was done. I looked across the yard at Nolan. He stood still, drink in hand, shoulders stiff. His face was unreadable, calm in a way that made my stomach tighten. I told myself he was being dramatic. It was clearly a joke. Everyone else laughed, even Rhea, nudging me with a grin and whispering, "Play along, it's funny." I smiled, tried to join in, but there was a tension under the surface that I couldn't ignore. Nolan didn't move. He didn't speak. He just nodded politely when someone tried to get his attention, then walked away toward the house. Inside, he moved methodically, tidying the counters, aligning the mugs. I asked if he was upset. "No," he said, "I'm fine." His calm tone made me want to argue, to insist that I hadn't done anything wrong. But I didn't. I told myself he would get over it, as he always did. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the quiet hum of the house. The guest room door clicked softly, a sound I barely noticed at first. I assumed he was working, just organizing, just being Nolan. I didn't understand that this quiet, methodical behavior was the beginning of something deliberate, something that would measure every word, every laugh, every action I thought was inconsequential. The next morning, his side of the bed was cold, his mug already washed. On the counter, a small calendar alert glowed softly on his phone. Downtown 10:40 a.m. I assumed it was work-related, though the specificity made me uneasy. Later, I noticed a notification. Someone had tagged me in the video from the barbecue. I opened it and saw myself laughing, Grant speaking, and Nolan standing there, expressionless. Dozens of comments followed, laughing emojis, teasing remarks, subtle mockery. I felt a flutter of embarrassment, but I brushed it off, pretending it didn't matter. By the time Nolan returned, he didn't mention the video. He placed his mug carefully on the counter, his movements precise. I asked what he thought of the post. He said, "It says more about you than it does about him." I laughed nervously, trying to dismiss it, but his quiet, controlled presence made me feel small. That night, the hum of the printer and the soft click of drawers in the guest room reminded me that nothing would go unnoticed. I told myself it was harmless, that I was still in control. But for the first time, I realized that his silence, his calm, and his meticulousness were not signs of weakness. They were signs of preparation, and I was already too far inside his plan. By Monday, the video had spread farther than I ever thought it would. It wasn't viral in a celebrity way, just enough to make people in our town whisper. At the supermarket, the cashier smiled a little too knowingly when I paid. At work, someone left the clip open on their screen, pretending to scroll through emails when I walked by. I tried to act unbothered. That was my rule. If you look guilty, you are guilty. So I laughed when people brought it up. When one of my coworkers said, "You two must have a wild marriage," I said, "Only when the neighbor drinks too much." Everyone laughed again, and that made me feel like I'd taken the story back. Ria texted during lunch saying I should post something cheeky, like a caption about modern marriages surviving bad jokes. She said if I turned it into content, people would stop taking it seriously. I told her she was right. That night, I drafted a post. When your neighbor can't hold his liquor, but your marriage can handle a laugh. I added a wink emoji. Before I hit upload, I hesitated. Nolan's face in the clip flashed in my mind, the quiet, controlled expression. I told myself he wouldn't see it anyway. He didn't use social media much. I posted it. Within an hour, it had over 300 likes. When Nolan got home, he put his keys in the bowl by the door, hung up his jacket and said, "Long day?" I said yes, pretending not to notice the tightness around his mouth. I waited for him to mention the post, but he didn't. Instead, he poured himself water and said, "Do you ever get tired of explaining yourself to strangers?" I asked what he meant. He said, "You're turning everything into a performance." I told him I was just making light of it, trying to move on. He said, "You don't move on by broadcasting it." I wanted to argue, but instead asked what he'd had for lunch. He said, "Documentation." I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking, but he looked serious. I asked if he was okay. He said, "Fine." Then he went upstairs. Later, while I was watching TV, I heard a faint hum coming from the guest room again, the printer. A minute later, it stopped, and I heard the soft click of a drawer closing. It made me uneasy. I thought about knocking, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was printing invoices for work. The next morning, he was already gone when I woke up. His mug was clean, as always, but the smell of toner lingered faintly in the air. On the counter sat a small sticky note with the words, "Pick up forms." I assumed it was something boring, like insurance paperwork. I threw it away without thinking. At work, my manager asked if I had a minute. She closed her office door and said she'd seen the video. She said it wasn't a huge issue, but since my husband's name and face were visible, the company wanted me to be mindful of optics. I smiled and said, "Of course." She gave me that look people give when they think you're lying but don't want to deal with it. When I told Ria later, she said my boss was jealous. "You made a whole room laugh," she said. "Women aren't supposed to make men uncomfortable, even when it's funny." That line made me feel righteous again. I told myself Nolan's reaction was just another example of men not being able to handle confident women. That night, I came home to find him in the kitchen sorting papers into piles. Each pile had a small yellow tab labeled Utilities, Household, and Bank. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Organizing." I said, "You never organize." He said, "Maybe I should have started earlier." The air between us felt heavy. I told him he was acting like a stranger. He said, "Maybe that's because you introduced yourself to everyone else first." I told him that was cruel. He said, "So was the laugh." I went upstairs and called my mother. She said Nolan was too sensitive, that men don't like being embarrassed. "He'll calm down," she said. "Just let him feel like the man for a while." I hated that phrase, but I let her talk because I wanted reassurance from someone. When I came back downstairs, Nolan was gone. The front door was locked, his shoes by the mat, but the car wasn't in the driveway. I called his phone. No answer. I texted, "Where did you go?" He replied 2 hours later, "Out." That was it. The next few days followed a pattern. He left early, came home late. He was polite, calm, and distant. When I tried to start conversations, he answered with short, neutral sentences. I began overcompensating, wearing more makeup, cooking his favorite meals, posting cheerful photos online. People commented how strong I looked, how couple goals we still seemed despite the drama. I believed them for a while. Friday evening, Ria came over with a bottle of wine. We sat on the couch, watching a show we'd already seen twice. She said I was handling everything perfectly, that Nolan needed to see how unbothered I was. "Men hate when you don't grovel," she said. I laughed because it sounded empowering. Halfway through the bottle, the front door opened. Nolan stepped inside, saw us, and gave Ria a polite nod. She said, "Hey, stranger," too brightly. He said, "Evening," and went upstairs. I could feel her watching me, waiting for me to say something. I said, "See? He's fine." But my voice came out tight. When she left, I found him sitting at his desk, laptop open. The spreadsheet on the screen had rows of dates and short notes beside them. I saw my name written next to one entry, BBQ, 7:43 p.m. My stomach dropped. I asked what that was. He said, "A record." I said, "Of what?" He said, "Reality." I told him he was losing it, that he was turning into some kind of investigator. He said, "You prefer rumors, I prefer proof." I tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. I said, "You're not actually documenting me, are you?" He said, "I'm documenting what happened. You documented it too, didn't you? Just differently." I left the room shaking. That night I couldn't sleep. The quiet felt unnatural, like the house was holding its breath again. Around midnight, I heard a faint tap, paper sliding into a drawer. I got up, walked halfway down the hall, and saw him closing the study door gently. He didn't notice me. He was carrying a single sheet of paper and a pen. For a second, I thought about asking what he was doing, but the calmness on his face scared me more than anger ever could. In the morning, his mug was there again, upside down, perfectly clean. But next to it was a printed calendar page with his neat handwriting marking, "Meeting personal, 11:15 a.m. I picked it up and stared at it. I almost wanted to crumple it, but I left it on the counter, as if touching it would make it real. At work, I couldn't concentrate. My co-workers' whispers seemed louder now. I told myself they were jealous of the attention, but deep down, I knew it wasn't admiration anymore. It was pity. The clip had started circulating beyond our circle. Someone had uploaded it to a meme page. The caption read, "How to humiliate your husband in one easy laugh." That night, I found Nolan sitting in the living room, reading. I stood there for a moment before saying I'd seen the post. He nodded without looking up. I asked if he was embarrassed. He said, "You should know." I said, "You can't blame me for what people post." He said, "You gave them material." I told him I was tired of him treating me like a criminal. He said, "Criminals hide things. You broadcasted yours." I snapped. I told him I wasn't going to live in a house where every word I said was dissected. He said, "Neither am I." Then he got up, went to the kitchen and rinsed his mug again. The sound of running water filled the silence. I stood there, trembling, watching him dry the cup with that same slow care. He put it back in the cabinet, closed the door and said, "You'll see soon." I asked what that meant. He said, "Proper things take time." I didn't answer. I just stood there, feeling the air thicken. He looked at me, not with anger, but with finality. That scared me more than any argument ever had. Later that night, when I checked my phone, the video had been deleted. The original post was gone. I felt a sudden rush of relief, like maybe things could go back to normal. Then I noticed an email notification from a local paper. The subject line read, "Statement regarding viral video incident." I clicked it open. It was a press inquiry. Someone wanted a comment from the woman in the clip. They'd found my work email somehow. My pulse started racing. I called Nolan's phone immediately, but he didn't answer. A few minutes later, I got a text from him. "Stop explaining. You've said enough." I sat on the couch with the phone still in my hand, the cursor blinking in that empty reply box. For once, I didn't know what to say. The weekend arrived, and with it, the neighborhood block party. I told myself I was ready, that I could reclaim the story. Nolan had been quiet all week, polite but distant, and I had convinced myself he was overreacting. I wore the bright dress I loved, the one that made me feel taller, alive, seen. I smoothed my hair one last time before stepping onto the patio. The smell of barbecue filled the air, and people were already gathered around the long tables, talking and laughing. Grant was there, of course, a little steadier than the last time, but still his old self, loud, obnoxious, and unapologetically charming. I reminded myself he was harmless. I told Rhea, "Let's just enjoy ourselves tonight, nothing to worry about." She smiled, nodded, and twirled a strand of hair around her finger. The music started, and I moved through the crowd with a practiced ease. I laughed at jokes, told a few of my own, and even winked at neighbors I barely knew. Everything felt under control until Grant, slightly tipsy again, leaned toward me and whispered, "Remember our wild night?" I laughed too quickly, hoping it would pass unnoticed. The people nearby chuckled, and I gave a little shrug, pretending it was a private joke. But then I noticed Nolan across the yard. His posture was rigid, shoulders squared, arms crossed. His face didn't betray emotion, yet there was a tension in the air, like a storm gathering quietly. I felt a flicker of frustration. He never made a scene. He never yelled. But the way he was standing there made me realize that calm could be more frightening than anger. I told myself he was being dramatic again. I turned back to the group and tried to redirect the conversation. "Tell me about your new garden," I said, forcing a smile. Grant didn't hear me. He kept teasing, nudging the story into the same territory, bringing up imagined scenarios of what could have happened. I laughed, just to keep the mood light. But then I caught a glimpse of Nolan walking slowly toward the house. My heart skipped a beat. I thought he was leaving, but he didn't. He opened the door, disappeared inside, and closed it without a sound. The soft click made my stomach twist. I tried to brush it off, told Rhea, "He's just being silly. He'll come around." She nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. The rest of the evening went on, and I forced myself to engage, telling stories and laughing. I made a few jokes at Nolan's expense, pointing out how he was always serious, never fun. Everyone laughed, some a little uncomfortably, but I convinced myself it was harmless. After the party, I followed the usual routine, cleaning up and putting leftovers in the fridge. Nolan was already in the living room, laptop open. I asked what he was doing. He said nothing, just keeping track. I rolled my eyes. "Keeping track of what?" I asked. He said, "Everything, so it doesn't get lost." I moved closer, peeking at the screen. Rows of dates, times, notes. One row caught my eye. BBQ, 8:17 p.m. Laughter recorded. My stomach tightened. I asked what that meant. He didn't answer at first. He just looked at me with that quiet, steady gaze, the one that made me feel smaller, like a child caught in a storm. Then he said, "Documentation." I laughed nervously, saying, "You're joking." He shook his head. "You think I'm joking because you've never had to be accountable." I wanted to say something sharp to regain control. It's just a joke. Everyone knows that. He leaned back slightly, his voice calm but firm. It's only a joke until someone records it. That made me pause. I tried to laugh it off, but it sounded forced. I told him he was being ridiculous, that he needed to let things go. He said, "I'm not letting go. I'm keeping a record." The next few days blurred together. I went to work, tried to concentrate, but my phone kept buzzing with notifications, comments, reposts, whispers in the office. I told myself it was harmless, that people admired my confidence. But there was a growing edge of unease. When I tried to tell co-workers it was all in fun, they nodded politely but didn't smile. One afternoon, I went to the coffee shop with Ria. We sat at our usual table, and I kept glancing at my phone. She asked if I'd heard about the new comments on the video. I said yes, but I laughed, pretending not to care. Ria leaned closer and whispered, "He's really keeping track, you know. You might want to be careful." I waved her off, said she was overreacting. Back at home, the quiet was oppressive. Nolan didn't speak much, moved methodically, always focused. I found him in the kitchen, placing items in neat rows, as if he were cataloguing the house itself. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Just making sure things are in order." I told him it was excessive. He said, "Maybe order is better than chaos." I tried to engage him, asked about his day, tried to joke about Grant, the video, everything. He didn't respond the way I expected. Instead, he said, "You're more concerned about appearances than reality." I felt a surge of irritation. "I'm concerned about both," I said, trying to sound witty. He didn't smile. "Reality matters more," he said. That night, I went upstairs early. I told myself I was giving him space, though part of me wanted to sneak into the guest room and see what he was doing. I didn't. I lay in bed, pretending to read, listening for the hum of the printer, the soft click of a drawer. When I finally drifted to sleep, I felt a strange tension, like the house itself was holding its breath. The next morning, his mug was upside down in the sink, clean. His side of the bed untouched. I noticed a small sticky note on the counter. "Bring forms." I assumed it was something routine, and I didn't think much of it. At work, the whispers continued. Someone had printed out screenshots of the video, passed them around the office. I laughed nervously when people commented, pretending to be confident. But I could feel their eyes on me differently now. Not admiration, not envy, but judgment, just faintly. When I got home, Nolan was in the living room again, laptop open. I asked what he was doing. He said, "Tracking." I asked, "Tracking what?" He said, "Events, interactions, proof." I laughed. "Proof of what?" He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at me calmly, then said, "That everything you say and do has an effect, whether you notice it or not." I felt a lump in my throat. I tried to joke about it, make light of the spreadsheet. He said, "Jokes don't undo reality." That night, I went to the kitchen to pour water, and I noticed something new. A small USB taped under the taxes folder. I picked it up, inspected it. There was no label. I asked Nolan about it. He said, "For reference." I said, "Reference for what?" He said, "You'll see." I felt a flicker of panic, but I swallowed it. I told myself I was imagining things, that he was just being meticulous. I poured the water, took a breath, and tried to act normal. That weekend, we went to a small dinner at a friend's house. I wanted to show Nolan and everyone that things were fine, that I was confident and in control. I laughed at stories, told a few of my own. Grant was there, a little tipsy, but quiet. I felt relief. Maybe the worst was over. Then someone brought up the barbecue. I laughed, and someone else repeated the joke about our wild night. My laughter was automatic. I looked at Nolan, and his face was unreadable. He didn't get up. He didn't leave. But the quiet weight of his presence filled the room. I tried to keep the conversation moving. I asked about new projects at work, the kids' activities. He responded in short, neutral sentences. I felt my frustration rising. Why wouldn't he just laugh, make it easy, like everyone else? Later, when we got home, I found him in the study. He had a neat stack of papers, and the laptop displayed a spreadsheet with columns labeled date, event, notes. I caught a glimpse of one entry, BBQ, 7:43 p.m., laughter. I said, "Are you seriously still recording that?" He looked at me calmly. "I'm documenting reality." I tried to laugh, but the sound faltered. "It's just a joke." He shook his head. "It's a joke until someone suffers for it." The quiet tension was suffocating. I wanted to argue, to laugh, to do something to reclaim control. But every word I thought to say sounded empty. I realized that his calm was a weapon I couldn't fight, a force that didn't need to shout or storm the room. I went upstairs to my bedroom and sat on the bed, scrolling through my phone. The video had been deleted from social media. I felt a flicker of relief, then panic. Why delete it? Was it too late already? I texted Ria, asking what she thought. She said, "Don't worry, you're fine. Just keep acting like nothing happened." I told myself she was right. I even tried to believe it. But the feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. Something had shifted, and I couldn't see it yet. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard the faint tap of paper in the study. I didn't move. I listened. The sound stopped, a soft click of a drawer, then silence. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening right under my nose. Something deliberate. The next morning, the house felt unusually still. I noticed the sticky note on the counter. Follow up. I didn't know what it meant, but the precision, the neatness of it, made my chest tighten. When Nolan returned from his errands, he didn't greet me immediately. He placed his mug on the opposite side of the counter from mine and started rinsing dishes. I asked about his morning. He said, "Checked on things." I asked what things. He said, "Everything you care about." I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to laugh it off, but I didn't. I knew, deep down, that things were no longer just about jokes or public appearances. Something had begun that I couldn't control, and for the first time, I realized that laughing might not fix anything. I went to bed that night, my phone silent, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how a simple laugh at a drunken neighbor's joke could lead to this, the quiet scrutiny, the organized chaos, the feeling that I was being watched and measured. And I knew, even then, that this was only the beginning. The following week felt like walking through fog. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint clicking of Nolan's keyboard, the soft shuffle of his slippers on the hardwood. I tried to act normal, but it was impossible. I could feel him watching, judging, calculating, and I hated it. I had always been the one in control, the one who commanded attention, who could twist situations to my advantage. Now, everything I thought I knew about power in our marriage seemed fragile. One evening, the kids were asleep, and I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone. Social media still buzzed with remnants of the barbecue video, even though most posts had been deleted. People were still talking, tagging friends, sending private messages laughing about it. I laughed too, trying to convince myself that it didn't matter, that Nolan's coldness was temporary. He appeared in the doorway of the living room, arms crossed, expression calm but unreadable. I looked up and forced a smile. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "I know it's been a weird week, but maybe we can just relax tonight." He tilted his head, slow, deliberate. "Relax," he repeated softly. "Do you know what that means in our house right now?" I shook my head, trying to hide the flutter in my chest. "I mean, I don't know. Just forget everything that happened." He walked over and set a folder on the coffee table. It wasn't just any folder. It was labeled Household 2025. The neatness of it, the precision, made me feel small. "This is everything," he said. "Every expense, every interaction, every detail that matters. I laughed nervously. You're joking. This is ridiculous. He didn't smile. You think it's ridiculous because you don't understand the consequences. I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to argue, to dismiss it, to turn the conversation back to jokes and casual laughter, but the weight of his calm stare held me in place. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He was beyond that. He was deliberate. Later that evening, I went to the kitchen to pour myself a drink. The house smelled faintly of coffee and toner. A sticky note caught my eye. Bring forms. I picked it up, read it, and felt a flicker of panic. I didn't know what forms he meant, but I knew it wasn't trivial. I shoved it into my purse and tried to pretend I didn't care. Ria called around 9. She sounded cheerful, oblivious. How's it going at home? She asked. I laughed a little too loudly. Same as always, I said. Nothing to worry about. She hesitated. You sure? He seems intense lately. I waved it off. He's fine. Just being Nolan. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening. That night, I noticed him leaving the guest room door slightly ajar, a soft red light glowing from his laptop. I tiptoed down the hallway, curious but afraid. I peeked through the gap and saw him typing rapidly, eyes focused. There was a spreadsheet open, entries labeled with dates and notes, some referring to me, some to social interactions, some to our neighbors. I backed away quietly. The next morning, I saw him standing in the kitchen, mug in hand, staring out the window. His side of the counter was empty. Mine held a half-finished coffee. Morning, I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't answer immediately. He placed the mug down carefully, straightened it so it was perfectly aligned with the edge of the counter. Did you sleep well? He finally asked. I nodded. Yeah, fine. You? Enough, he said. The day went on, tense but quiet. At the school pickup, I tried to make small talk with him about Eli's homework, but he kept his answers short. I noticed a couple of parents glancing at us, whispering. I tried to tell myself they were harmless comments, that they didn't matter. That evening, I decided to check the guest room again, hoping to find some clue that he was just being meticulous, not planning something serious. I peeked inside. The desk was clear, except for a small USB taped under the keyboard, labeled only by a date. I touched it lightly. What is this? I asked. He appeared behind me, calm and deliberate. For reference, he said. I felt a sudden tightness in my chest. Reference for what? You'll see, he said and walked away. I stayed there for a moment, trying to process what that meant. Then I realized it wasn't just the USB or the spreadsheets or the neat stacks of paper. It was the way he had shifted. The quiet, the methodical approach, the distance. He wasn't reacting emotionally, he was preparing. Later, I called Margot, my mother. I tried to frame everything as temporary, a misunderstanding. I said, he's being so serious about something that's clearly nothing. She paused. Elara, maybe you should slow down. Men don't always react like women do. Sometimes silence is more dangerous than yelling. I laughed nervously. Dangerous? It's just a joke. I'm serious, she said. He's watching. You need to pay attention. Her words lingered in my mind as I hung up. I tried to focus on work, but my attention kept drifting back to the house, to the spreadsheet, to the USB, to his measured silences. That night, I poured myself a drink in the living room, scrolling through my phone, pretending to check social media. I was careful not to post anything, not to laugh at any memes, not to draw attention, but I could feel the quiet weight of Nolan's presence, even though he was upstairs. At 11, I heard a faint hum, the printer. I froze. A minute later, the soft click of a drawer. I didn't move. I didn't peek. I lay on the couch, pretending to watch a show I didn't care about, listening to every sound. The next morning, I woke early. His side of the bed was empty, his mug gone. The air was too still. I checked my phone. No messages, no notifications, just the faint glow of the calendar on my lock screen. I noticed it. Follow-up, 9:25 a.m. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it was deliberate. By the afternoon, I could feel the tension in the neighborhood. People whispered when I walked by, glanced at me with half-smiles. I told myself it didn't matter, that they were just reacting to the video. But deep down, I knew it was different now. My laughter had consequences, and someone was counting them. That evening, I tried to break the tension. I asked Nolan if he wanted to watch a movie together. He said no. I suggested ordering takeout. He said he'd already eaten. I tried joking about the week, about Grant, about the video. He didn't respond, just sat quietly, eyes forward, calm but distant. I realized then that nothing I did could undo what had begun. The careful way he aligned mugs, the spreadsheets, the notes, the quiet hums at night. All of it was a warning. I had been the one laughing, but he was the one in control. I went to bed that night staring at the ceiling. Every sound from the guest room, every click, every hum of the printer felt like a reminder. I had laughed at a joke, and now the weight of methodical preparation hung over me. I didn't understand it yet, but I could feel that the next move would not be mine. In the dark, I thought about Eli, about what he was seeing, about how quiet Nolan had become around the house. I realized for the first time that my actions didn't just affect me, they rippled through our family. But I told myself it didn't matter. I was careful, clever, untouchable. Until that moment, I had never considered that someone could outmaneuver me without yelling, without confrontation, and without being noticed. I drifted to sleep with the faint hum of the printer in my mind, wondering how long it would take for my carefully curated confidence to unravel. The truth was already in motion, quiet and precise, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. By the time Friday evening rolled around, I was exhausted. A week of careful smiles, forced laughter, and pretending everything was fine had drained me, but I told myself I was handling it. Nolan hadn't said much, only responded in clipped sentences, or stayed quietly in another room. His calm had grown heavier, more deliberate. I could feel it pressing down on me like an invisible weight. I tried to distract myself with work, social media, and small tasks around the house, but the tension followed me. I found myself thinking back to the barbecue, the party, the video. Each laugh, each casual shrug, every comment I'd made publicly now felt like a tiny crack in the glass of our life. And Nolan, he hadn't raised his voice, hadn't shouted, hadn't stormed out. He had simply begun documenting, tracking, and quietly preparing. That evening, Ria stopped by. I told her Nolan was acting strangely again. She said, "Strange? He's methodical. That's how he shows control." I laughed, dismissive. "Control over what? He's overreacting." She leaned closer. "Elara, trust me. He's not overreacting. He's collecting. He's preparing. Watch." I didn't believe her at first. But then, as I watched Nolan from the kitchen doorway, I could see the precise way he aligned the mugs, the way he double-checked the folders on the counter. His laptop was open again. I caught a glimpse. Spreadsheet columns with dates, events, notes. Every entry detailed interactions with me, the neighbor, even our friends and family. He didn't glance at the screen as I watched. He wasn't hiding anything. He simply continued, calm and focused, like a man executing a plan I couldn't yet see. I wanted to laugh, to make a joke, to reclaim the night in my mind. "You really are obsessed," I said, moving closer. He didn't respond immediately. He looked up briefly, his gaze steady. "I'm not obsessed," he said softly. "I'm being careful." I tilted my head, trying to sound playful. "Careful? About what?" "You'll find out," he said. And then he returned to his work, as if the conversation had ended, though I could feel the unspoken meaning hanging between us. Later that night, I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone, trying to convince myself the world still loved me. Comments, likes, and messages made me feel powerful for a few minutes, until I remembered the way Nolan had moved through the house, quiet, precise, and unyielding. I thought about the USB taped under the folder labeled taxes, the sticky notes, the spreadsheets. All of it was proof of his attention to detail, of the way he had shifted from passive tolerance to quiet authority. I tried calling him into the living room to talk, but he didn't respond. I went upstairs, thinking maybe I could sneak a peek at what he was doing. The guest room door was closed. I stopped myself. I didn't want to push him. I didn't want to provoke him. But a part of me, the part that thrived on control and attention, wanted to know. The next morning, I woke early, hoping to catch him before he left. His side of the bed was empty, his mug gone. The house smelled faintly of toner, a subtle reminder of his nightly work. On the counter, a small sticky note read, "Follow-up." I didn't know what to make of it. I tossed it in the trash, telling myself I was imagining meaning where there was none. That day, I tried to keep busy, running errands, checking emails, posting carefully curated photos online, but I couldn't stop thinking about the spreadsheet, the notes, the quiet precision. I realized with a sinking feeling that my laughter, my jokes, my attempts to reclaim the narrative were meaningless. He had already set his plan in motion. That evening, I decided to confront him. I found him in the study, laptop open, neat stacks of paper beside him. I tried to sound casual. "You've been at this all week. Can we just talk?" He looked up slowly, calmly. "We've talked," he said. I pressed. "I mean, really talk. About us. About what's going on." He leaned back, hands folded. "You want a conversation? I'm showing you a process." I frowned. "Process? Nolan, this isn't a job, it's our life." He shook his head slightly. "It's not a process for me. It's protection." I felt my chest tighten. Protection from what? "You," he said simply. Then, without another word, he closed the laptop and stood. His movements were measured, deliberate, calm. He carried a small folder in his hand, nothing flashy, no emotion in his steps. I realized then that whatever was coming, it wasn't about anger or revenge in the way I expected. It was methodical, lawful, inevitable. I tried to regain control. "Nolan, wait. Don't do anything dramatic." He paused, and for the first time, I noticed the slight shift in his posture. Calm, composed, but absolute. "I'm not doing anything dramatic," he said. "I'm doing this properly." I laughed nervously, trying to dismiss the weight in his voice. "Properly? Properly? What does that even mean?" He gave me a look, quiet, steady. "Exactly what it means. Nothing more, nothing less." I wanted to argue, to mock, to dismiss it like I had done all week. But I couldn't. The finality in his tone, the precision in his movements, and the quiet authority in his stare left me frozen. He wasn't raising his voice. He wasn't storming the house. He simply existed in a state of calm that made my schemes, my jokes, my attempts to control everything, irrelevant. I watched him place the folder on the table, neat, upright, edges aligned perfectly with the table surface. The sight made my stomach twist. Inside, I imagined, was all the evidence of my public laughter, my reckless jokes, the comments I had made, everything I had thought was harmless. He had been silent, but he had been recording, noting, and preparing. Every interaction, every laugh, every public moment I had orchestrated to make him look ridiculous, carefully logged and preserved. I stepped back, unsure what to say. He simply looked at me, hands in his pockets. "I've given you time to understand the seriousness of your actions," he said. "Now, I will handle the consequences properly." I swallowed hard. "Consequences? Nolan, it's just a joke. It's harmless." He shook his head slowly. "It's only harmless until someone is hurt, and someone has been hurt." I tried to laugh, to soften the moment. "You're overreacting. You always overreact." "No," he said quietly. "I'm responding. Properly." The finality of his words sank into me. For the first time all week, I realized I was no longer in control. The laughter, the social media posts, the jokes, they didn't matter anymore. The precision of his calm, the stacks of notes, the spreadsheets, the USBs, all of it indicated that he had taken control of the narrative in a way I could not counter. I wanted to yell, to protest, to make light of it again. But the room was silent, and the air between us was taut with anticipation. I felt the weight of everything I had done, the consequences that were coming, and the knowledge that Nolan would execute his plan quietly, legally, and with total authority. I sat down heavily on the couch, my mind racing. I tried to convince myself that he was bluffing, that he would relent, that my charm, my laughter, my ability to twist situations could still save me. But as I looked at him, calm, composed, unreadable, I knew I was wrong. He was beyond reaction. He was preparation itself. And then, in the quiet of the living room, he turned and said simply, "I'll handle it properly. That's all you need to know tonight." I watched him walk toward the study, his steps slow, deliberate. He didn't look back. I realized in that moment that the next stage of our conflict would not be messy or emotional. It would be lawful, precise, and public. My laughter had ended. His patience had begun. The law office lobby was quiet except for the soft murmur of clerks and the click of shoes on tile. I sat frozen as a courier handed me an envelope, thick and official. Nolan stood beside me, calm, eyes steady. I opened it and saw the filings. Defamation, custody arrangements, and detailed documentation of every humiliating incident. He gave a single nod. That was it. Everything ended there.